So now that we've completed the front and back draft, we've trued them together and balanced out the armhole. This segment that we're ready for now is to get ready to do a fitting back to our dress form. There's a couple of last things I want to do here to prepare my pattern piece before we start to do a fitting, and then eventually it's going to look like this. We'll put the shoulders together and we'll put this on our dress form. If you are working with a client, then you would do this last little bit first and then have your client come in and do the last fitting. The tools that you're going to want for this video are your paper scissors, your sewing ruler, the blue color pencil, a regular pencil, eraser, some of your magic tape, as well as a pencil sharpener, and then of course your dress form or your client or yourself. Let's start by separating out the back from the front. Alright, so take out your front piece. What we want to do here is the center of the dart, there's a fold here, but we haven't drawn a line there yet. So take out a sharp pencil, and what we're going to do is right here at the bust apex, go ahead and find that crease, which was the center of the dart. Put a few dots in there so we can draw a straight line for the center of the dart. Now what we want to do is, when you're doing a fitting back to your client, you do not want to have the dart closed all the way right up to the apex, because it's going to have this really sharp point right at their bust apex, and it'll look funny. And later on also, when you're sewing, you'll do the same thing by backing the dart tip down and then redrawing the legs. So let's go ahead and do that right now. What you're going to do is, from the bust apex, along this center of the dart line, you're going to measure down 1 inch, put a dot there, and circle it. Now this will be our official dart tip. So that's the bust apex, this is our dart tip for the front pattern piece. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to redraw the dart legs here and here, but I don't want to get confused with the dart legs that we were doing from the draft. So I'm going to lightly erase these dart legs here. And on my paper, there's still some tape on here, and I'm not able to erase it all. So I'm going to just take a minute here to go ahead and remove this tape and erase these lines a little bit better. Now I can come back into this new dart tip. Again, this is 1 inch down from the bust apex. And I'm going to connect it back out here to my original dart legs. So just double check that your bust apex, this is the center of the dart, you can see that line, the new dart tip, which is 1 inch down, and then the new dart legs going out here to the waist. The next thing I want to do is, I want to put a grain line all the way through the middle of the pattern piece, going the same direction as center front. Ideally, you'd put the grain line right here at the bust apex and just square this up and back. But since we're doing a single dart sloper and the dart is here in the waist and a little bit off to the side, if I also add a grain line through all of these other lines going on here, I've noticed that beginner students get confused on which is which. So as a beginner, what we'll do with this pattern piece is, remember up here where we squared the neck with center front at the shoulder? Let's go ahead and turn that into our grain line for the whole pattern piece. So draw this top to bottom in the whole pattern piece. And what we'll do is we'll throw a couple arrows in here. In this way, the sample sewer knows that this is going with the grain of your fabric. Now let's come in here and let's also make that blue so we know that that line is the grain line. And we'll go ahead and make those arrowheads blue as well. Now the next most important line on here is going to be the HBL, the horizontal balance line, which went through the center of the apex. Let's make that one blue also, but you don't have to add any arrowheads to this because this is not a grain line. So again, that's our guideline, but not a grain line. One last thing we want to do here is we want to label this pattern piece. So taking out your pencil, come over here along this grain line, and we're going to label this front basic bodice and then in parentheses I'll put first draft. I also like to put on the date, so then I'll have on here first draft and today's date. And then if I make any changes to this, I'll keep changing the date on there so I know that this is the latest draft. Sometimes you might have 2 drafts of a front and 1 draft of a back because you're fixing and tweaking on them. And whichever one has the latest date, you'll know is the most current one. If you need to, you can also put some more information on here, like your client's name or their phone number. And something else that was helpful, for instance, on ours, we're doing a size 4 dress form. So you could write a large number 4 in here and put a box around it. Alright, so let's move over here and let's do some of this to the back as well. Now the back 2 darts are already complete. You don't have to back them off or do any changes to them like we did on the front. The first thing I want to do with the back is I want to get a grain line in here. Now if you remember, the center of our dart is perfectly straight, parallel with center back. So let's go ahead and take the center of this waist dart and turn that into our grain line for the whole pattern piece. So draw that in pencil and then sharpen your blue color pencil, and let's get this in blue. And then we'll put an arrowhead in here, and then also down here at the bottom. During this demonstration, I forgot to add some blue on the back horizontal balance line. I did it later during the project, but you can go ahead and take care of yours right now. Now for this back pattern piece, we also want to go ahead and label it as well. And I want to make this really simple for whoever else picks up my patterns and has to read the labeling on them. I want it to be consistent all the way through the pattern pieces. So what I'm going to do is, here was the front, and I was writing along the grain line here. And I want to make sure this is where the shoulder or the side seams go together. So if I were to write on the back, I would write the same direction as I'm doing here on the front. And then this one, the information is almost exactly the same. So this was front basic bodice, this is going to be back basic bodice. I also put in first draft and the date. So now you can see you're reading the same thing on the same pattern pieces, and the location for the information is in around the same area. The last thing we want to do here is I want to put the size 4. So remember we did a large 4 inside of a box. Let's go ahead and do that right here. So again, it's consistent with what you see on this pattern piece from the front. Now on our pattern pieces, we have way too much paper on here, and we want to come through and cut some stuff away. Looking at your front pattern piece, come over here to the shoulder, and let's go ahead and give this 1-inch seam allowance, and we'll cut off the extra paper. For me, when I'm starting to cut off paper from my pattern pieces, I try not to crumple them up and throw them away, because what if you need to come back and get some information from this? So go ahead and just keep these for now until we for sure don't need them. Come over here to the side seam. Again, we'll add 1-inch seam allowance and cut away that extra paper. Inside of this armhole, we're going to need to just have like 1-inch seam allowance, and then we're going to come in and eventually trim some of this so it'll bend and curve. So let's carefully add 1-inch seam allowance to this. Then inside of the neck here, when we're making a garment, you're only going to want just a little tiny 1/4 inch. But for now, I want you to have room in case you made a mistake. I want you to have some paper left over so you could still redraw the neckline if needed. So let's keep 1/2 inch on here. Now just now when I cut off the neck area, we had this information here where it was showing the top 16 3/4. I want to keep this just in case, so I wrote FT on here so I know that this is from the front. Now let's start preparing the back. Come over here to the back neck. We'll do the same thing. We'll add 1/2 inch seam allowance. And this piece here that has some information on here, let's go ahead and label this BK, just in case we need to find this puzzle piece again and see what that number was. Now up here at the shoulder of the back, we have a dart. We need to fold this dart before we cut off the seam allowance. So turn your paper to where center back is here, closest to you. And we're going to come out to the first dart leg of the shoulder dart and fold it. Now here at the dart tip, we can fold our paper so then we can close this dart leg going away from center back. Once you have it folded, you can crease it all the way off the pattern piece. And let's go ahead and tape this in place. And you're going to want to tape it inside and outside of the shoulder line so we can come in and check the shoulder. Now for those of us who were doing the size 4 together, this little tiny 1/4 inch dart doesn't really affect the shoulder line very much. But if you did 3/8 or a 1/2 inch dart, you're going to notice there's like a little stair step or a little bit of a point on your shoulder. What you're going to want to do is this dot here from the shoulder, armhole ridge, connecting back to this dot at the neck. You're going to want to just go ahead and make this a nice clean straight line. Again, on mine there really was no change because the dart was so small. Now that I've trued up the shoulder, I want to go ahead and add 1-inch seam allowance. And I'm going to cut this seam allowance while the dart is still folded. And make sure you leave the dart folded. When we do the fitting, this dart needs to be already folded. Now we can come into the armhole And let's continue adding 1 inch of seam allowance, as well as here at the side seam. Now remember to keep all of these little leftover pieces just in case you need to come back and there was some kind of information on them that you have to reference. At this point, what we're going to do now is we're going to start folding our darts, putting the side seams back together, and then we're going to tape the shoulders together. Let's start here at center back. So this line right here, center back, is what we're going to see on our dress form. So what I want to do is I want to fold my paper right along that center back. I also don't want this to flop around, so I'm going to go ahead and take a piece of tape and I'm going to tape it up here by the neck and about almost down to the waist. Now the bottom dart here at the waist, we already started to fold it, so it should be really easy for you to go ahead and put this back together. Again, put some tape above the waist and below the waist, just in case we need to draw in the waist area. And now let's go over here to the front pattern piece. Same thing we did on the back. Come over here to center front and let's fold this under right along that center front. Then we'll tape this flap down up here towards the neck and pretty far down here along the waist area. The dart here for the front, remember now we backed it off by 1 inch coming down. So when you do this fold, be really careful that you're now getting a new fold on the dart leg. So come over here, this is center front. Come out to the first dart leg, the new dart leg, and we're going to fold our paper right along that pencil line. And just double check that you cannot see any more pencil because it's perfectly right on the fold. Now we can crease our pattern piece in half along the dart tip. So come in here to the dart tip. So I got it folded right at the dart tip. Now I can close the dart going away from center front, making sure to connect with this new dart leg. And then we'll tape it above the waistline and a little piece down here just below the waistline. For the front pattern piece, since the dart is really long, I like to also tape it up here a little bit higher, closer towards that dart tip. Now after backing off this dart and refolding it down in the waist here, basically your waist line that you already drawn in, it should not have changed. There shouldn't be any kind of a weird stair step or anything like that. If there is a slight offset to it, don't worry about it. Later on, we're going to take this pattern piece and we're going to turn it into a shoulder dart and waist dart. So we're going to eventually go back to where the dart comes all the way to the apex. So unless you had a dramatic change on your waistline, don't worry, you don't have to fix anything at this time. Now we're going to put these together by folding the side seam of the front, so it's already folded, and we're going to tape it on top of the back. And for the side seam, I would put 3 pieces of tape on here. So one up by the armhole, one somewhere in the middle, and another one down here close to the waist. Taking a look at my back here, it's kind of sticking up a little bit. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and tape this one up high as well. Now when you go to do a fitting back to the dress form, all of this paper here is going to be in the way because of her hips. So what we're going to do is we're going to start to clip along the curves so this will relax during the fitting. The same thing is true here for the armhole. We want it to be relaxed when we do the fitting. So go ahead and clip this all along the curves. Once you get to the straightaway part, you don't have to clip it. Now the same thing that we did was, now we took the front and we folded the side seam under and taped the front on top of the back. What we'll do is the same thing here with the shoulder. We'll fold the shoulder of the front and we can tape this to the shoulder here on the back when we get to the dress form. One other thing that I wanted to show you is when you're working with your pattern pieces and as you're manipulating them doing darts and such, you'll notice that your stuff will get kind of wrinkly and beat up. So pattern paper, you can press it flat again. Some of the deeper wrinkles won't totally come out, but at least your paper will lay flat. What you can do is take your iron and put it on a low setting. So for instance, I have this on 4, which would be the same as ironing for like some blends. And then I have the steam completely off. You don't want to do any steam or else your paper will get all warbly. So then you can come in and you can iron along your paper. And you'll notice it'll want to start to curl up, but if you just keep your hands on it for a minute and let your hands soak up the heat from the iron and let it cool off totally flat, then your paper pattern will be back to being super flat. It'll still have some of these wrinkles and stuff in here, but at least it's a lot cleaner than it was before. Now obviously when you're working on your pattern drafts, I wouldn't want to iron here on the pencil side because then you'll get pencil onto the iron itself. And if you have 2 different irons to choose from, I would use whichever iron is your older kind of beat up iron. So I would have my paper upside down to where there's no pencil. And then so for instance here I'm pressing out those dart legs so it's smooth again. And then I'll use my hands to soak up that heat while it's still laying flat, and this way it won't start to curl over. So sometimes when I'm getting prepared to meet with a client and I want my stuff to be really crisp and clean and presentable, I'll go ahead and get to the stage where I've folded my darts and I have everything ready except for the shoulders. And then I'll just come in here and on the back side of this, I'll press this one more time to get it super flat and clean. Now you'll want to make sure that the tape that you're using is the magic tape. If you use something different, it's going to stick to your iron, especially if it's that glossy tape. The glossiness will totally stick to your iron. So now it'll be all nice and crisp and clean, so when you present this to your client, they know that you have respect for your work and what you're doing, and you're charging them money, so you're going to want it to look really presentable. Now at this stage, you're ready to go do a fitting back to the dress form or to your client. Now when you're getting ready to come back and do a fitting to your dress form, you'll want to make sure that all of your tape and everything has stayed exactly where it was. If you're sharing dress forms, for instance, at a fashion school or between you and your roommate or something, they might have changed the location of your tape, so just come back and make sure everything is exactly where it was. If you're meeting with a client, When you start to do the actual fitting part, you're going to want to have their bust apex level at around your eye level. So ideally, you would have something for them to stand up on, so some kind of a stepping stool or something. And then depending on how tall they are, you might have to kind of step back a little bit to look at something, the horizontal balance lines at an eye level. In this instance, since I have a dress form, I could just raise it up and down. Now, you'll notice if you've ever tried to pin paper to a dress form, the pins always just tear right through. So for me, I go ahead and I just use tape to tape this back onto here. When you're taping this back onto the dress form, you want to use the least amount of tape in the least amount of locations as possible. The reason for that is if I tape this on here all nice and perfect, I'm not going to notice if there's a mistake. So if you're using a dress form and taping yours back on there, do the exact same things that I'm doing here. So let's go ahead and start here at center back. So we'll have a piece of tape. This is center back at the neck, and we'll go ahead and we'll get this in place right here, center back at neck. For the next one, I want you to come along center back, all the way back down to the waist at center back, and tape this at the waist. And make sure you're taping above your waistline here and below the neckline there and at center back. Now, since we only have those two locations on there, it should be fine. If you're noticing it's pulling a little bit away here at the quarter panel, oh, you know what? We never made that blue. The quarter panel horizontal balance line for the back, when we go back to the tabletop, I want to make this in blue. But anyways, if you notice that when you're pulling on the pattern piece, it's moving a little bit off of center here at the horizontal balance line, then we'll go ahead and have a piece of tape there as well. But other than these three locations, I wouldn't do any more than that. Now we can come around here to center front at the neck. So keep in mind that the top of your paper here, we did 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that's the original neck. Remember when we did the draft and the measurements up to the neck? The neck right here is right at the juncture of her neck in her throat area. And what we need to do is we need to drop this down 1/2 inch so it's comfortable on her. That's the original neck, and then we drop down 1/2 inch to give a little bit of ease to get it off of her throat. So you're going to want that back at the neck at center front. But when we tape it, we're going to tape here below the neckline at that 1/2 inch mark. Now for the next one, I want to come down here to the waist at center front. But remember when I took my measurements, I had a pencil in here. That way my measurement would not cut in between the bust and make a shorter distance. Well, now this piece of paper wants to fit on here with that pencil space right there. So have your pencil there to notice when you come down to the waist at center front and you're taping this above your pencil line, that pencil is filling that space right there. Again, the reason we're doing this is if you make a dress shirt with a button on there, it's not going to pull, so the button's not going to be pulling because this shirt will fit her perfectly and smooth all the way through. So that's my two locations there. What I'm going to do is, since I'm working here on a dress form, I'm going to go ahead and tape this pencil so it will stay in place. So a little piece of tape on the pencil as well as the paper pattern. If you're working with a client, then this would simulate her wearing a bra, and you would make sure that the pattern piece is not cupping inwards, that it's just laying flat across her shirt above her bra. Now the side seam's already in place. You should not tape this anywhere. Don't tape anything of the side seam to the body. We want this to be free floating, because then you're going to notice right away if there's a mistake, if it's too far forward, too far back, or if the side seam's tilting. So the last part is we've pre-folded the shoulder of the front. So let's go ahead and lay the shoulder of the back downward. And this is where we're going to start working here up in the neck area. So what I'm going to want to do is just along a little bit of the curve of the neck, I'm just going to put a few clips in here, just enough to where I can get this to fold down. And then the last little bit is I want to cut diagonal. So I'm clipping in towards that dot. So now the shoulder, the straight line of the shoulder here, is not going to interfere with the bending of the neck curve itself. I'm also looking through the pattern paper at my dark tape inside of there and making sure that my pencil line is lining right up with the line here, the original tape that I have on the dress form. And then we can come in and bring the front shoulder to match with the back shoulder. Again, I'm going to want to clip a few spots here along the neck. So then we can come in here along the shoulder, and what I want to do is I'm going to line up the shoulder notch with the shoulder dart of the front, and I'll tape this in place. Now obviously, if you're working with a live person, so a client is coming in, you'll want to already clip some of the neck area. So then when you're doing this, you don't have to sit here and use scissors really close to their face. So again, I have this taped right here at the shoulder, so I matched up the notch with the dart. And now I'm able to come in and just see, do I like where the shoulder's hitting on the neck? Is it getting too tight in this area? If I need to, I can take this tape off and move the shoulder to get things to fit a little bit better. So from what I'm noticing here, everything looks really good. So I'm going to go ahead and tape this together at the neck and the shoulder, and then out here on the armhole ridge. I'm going to just leave that untaped for a minute while I come in and start double checking everything. So using another pencil, I can come in here, get the shaping of my dart, make sure the side seam is relaxed, checking the shaping here at the back armhole, making sure that this dart is poking out correctly, and the shoulder dart. And you should notice that there's ease inside this area here. And all of that, again, is so she can move. This is really important. Since we're doing a woven fabric that's tight, it doesn't have any stretch to it, you need to have this ease going through here. So this looks really good. Let's talk now about some issues that you might be having if you're doing this video for the second time and now you're doing custom work. So what you should be looking for right away is, if there's a tight pull in this area here, the distance going all the way across was too short. So to remedy that, you would have to take the shoulder apart and relax. So give some more ease into the shoulder and bringing this back down to relax that area there. If you don't have ease down in this area, then the measurement when we measured from center front to the dart leg and again to the side seam plus a little bit of ease, then you'll want to add some more ease depending on your client or your dress form. The ease here, there should be lots of room inside of here. Basically, we went down 1 inch and out 1/2. That was this whole thing that we were doing in this area. Now, if you recall on mine, we went down 1 inch and out 5/8 on the front and down 1 inch and out 1/2 on the back. And my side seam is perfect straight up and down. For you doing custom work, now's your time to come in here and fix the side seam so it is straight up and down. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to be able to look at this side seam at your eye level. And you're looking across the room at something like the slits between the cabinets or a door jamb or a window. And you want to make sure that this is straight up and down, just like you're hanging a picture and you're trying to get it straight. Once you think you have it where you like it, stand back. So go back 6 or 7 feet and see, does it look straight up and down? Maybe even ask someone, hey, does this look straight up and down? You might even want to turn it away from your eye and back to your eye and get a second look and just make sure that that's perfect. If it's not perfect, then at this stage, let's go ahead and take the side seam out, and you need to decide, did you like the bottom and you need to fix it up at the top because it was swerving one way or swerving the other way? So you would keep that one taped there, and you would start to relax your paper pattern out, always folding on a clean straight line. So for instance, maybe you have to add some more to the front armhole but 0 at the waist. Maybe you have to add to the back. And all of these things depend on the darts. Is it moving weird? Is it pulling weird? And you'll know when you're looking at yours that something is wrong. And you just, as a beginner, you just need to experiment. So maybe try adding a little bit to the top armhole, but leaving it 0 at the bottom, and you'll notice your side seam starts to straighten out. So that's what happened with me, is I still needed to add that 1 more 1/8 of an inch to the front, but 0 at the waist, and then I was able to get mine straight up and down. Now as you futz with this side seam, you're trying to get it straight up and down and also to match back up here with that shoulder seam. When I did the first draft, and I was noticing that no matter what I did with the side seam, I couldn't get it to straighten out with the shoulder. So what I had to do was a little bit of a tweak to the side seam on the dress form and the shoulder of the dress form. Then I was able to come back in with my first draft and fix the side seam here and fix the shoulders there. And then at one point I got everything to match perfectly, and then I adjusted the tape on my dress form to match what was working with the pattern pieces. One other thing to keep in mind is if you start moving the side seams or the shoulders to get them totally vertical and perfectly lined up, now that armhole balance is no longer balanced. So get them where you like them, and then eventually go back to the tabletop and measure your back armhole, measure your front armhole, and balance them out to where the back is 1/2 of an inch longer than the front. Let's talk through a little some of the problem solving up here at the shoulder. So again, the shoulder should be a straight line matching right up here with the side seam. If you're working with a dress form, you have that screw point on the plate, and basically that's dead center at the middle, so this should all be crossing right around that area. If you notice that your neck is drifting back a little or forward a little, or the armhole, now's your time to get it straightened back out. So I would untape these, fold the paper, draw on it, get everything back to where it's totally straight. And this is the area where I was saying you could move the shoulder a little bit as long as it's still squared up with the side seam. So for instance, if your front armhole measured longer than the back armhole, potentially this shoulder here needs to move forward a little bit to make the front shorter and the back longer. And now on the dress form, you'll be able to see how much room you could move it forward but still keeping this square. Another issue you might find is this area here. You should be able to get a pencil to move through behind here on her. Basically, it's her armhole ridge, which will sew a sleeve into this. If it's really tight in here, then when you made the shoulder dart, so for instance, we did a little tiny 1/4 inch shoulder dart. If you did a 3/8 or a 1/2 inch and this got really tight here, make it a smaller shoulder dart. If you're working with someone who's super petite, very small, dainty features, you probably have to have 0 shoulder dart at all if this got really tight on her here in this area. If this is really floppy and loose and wavy, then you need to make your shoulder dart larger to get some of that material to just have a nice, smooth, even curve to it. And you'll know what I'm talking about right away if it's kind of doing this double warp thing. It's just because there's too much fabric. So again, you would make your shoulder dart larger. Now here at the front dart, you can see where this was the apex of the dart. This is the new dart tip. On the paper, it's very pointy, so just kind of ignore that. And your client might be saying, hey, why is the bust point so low on me? And they're not going to like that, of course. They want it to be up higher. And you'll just have to explain to them, it's just because the paper itself is so stiff, it's holding that out. But once it's done in fabric, this will blend nicely right into the bust. And again, you do not want to have that right at her bust apex. So there should be ease all the way through here. Remember, on this dress form, we were basically doing 0 ease in the waist, and I was just measuring to the outside edge of the tape. But by the time we're done, there's still ease in this. When you move into your plus sizes, a plus size figure person wants to have more ease in that area. If you make them a garment and it's kind of stiff down here in the natural waist area, they're not going to like it at all. They're already kind of on the verge of not liking store-bought clothes that's too tight in that waist area. So now's your chance to make them something custom and perfect by giving them lots of room here at that natural waist. And if it looks kind of tight or you want to add more ease down in this area, add the same amount to the front and the same amount to the back and come back to 0 up here at the armhole. And you can give them a little more ease, but still keeping that side seam totally straight up and down. One other thing is, you might feel like everything just feels tight, like this is tight, you're not getting a lot of ease. If it seems like all of them feel tight, then when you were taking measurements, you were just pulling your tape a little bit too tight, your measurements were too short. But keep that in mind, you can add a little bit to center front and a little bit to center back. And I would do the smallest amount possible, because keep in mind also that eventually this is going to go all the way around her body. So if you add a little tiny 1/16 at the center front, a 1/16 at the center back on this draft, we still have the other side, which will now make it an 1/8 and another 1/8, and you add those together, and now we're adding a 1/4 inch all the way around. And then you'll get to this point where now it's too loose and you don't know why. So just be really careful that if you need to add to center front or center back, that it's a very small amount and it's a last option. Let's talk about the front armhole area. Same as the back, there should be a little bit of room in this area right here. Again, you're going to sew a sleeve in there, it's going to be woven, you want her to be able to move around, and it's not going to pull on the front of her shirt. If this feels like it's really tight on her body, then when you took this diagonal measurement, again, it was too short. So you might be getting a little tension in this area, as well as having this pull tight on here. So basically what you need is up here at the front shoulder, you would leave the back exactly where it is, and you would add to the front shoulder at this armhole ridge and go back to 0 here at the neck. And you can get this area here to just lightly loosen up a little bit off of here. And then when you get back to the tabletop, you'll want to match up your new shoulders and then retrue your armhole curve. And then of course go back and remeasure and balance your armhole so the back is 1/2 inch longer than the front. A couple other tips about working with a private client. When you're doing something like this, like you're really close and in their space, you're going to notice a few things that they'll do. One of them is they want to watch what you're doing, but when they do that, they tilt their chin down and they slump over. So you might end up thinking, wow, the back is really tight, but the front is so loose, and you don't realize they're watching you and they're changing the shape of their body. So I always tell them, hey, look ahead and keep your chin up. And that helps them to just stand normal, looking straight ahead, keep their chin up, and then you'll have the right posture for what you're doing. Also, when you're in this area, I kind of like to tell them what I'm doing right before I do it. So for instance, I'll say, oh, I need to check under here, underneath the bust area. Oh, right now I'm going to check down the side seam under your arm. And as you tell them, they'll be prepared ahead of time. So then you're not all of a sudden just pop in and you're sticking your pencil underneath their shirt or something like that. Another thing too is a lot of times, obviously, they have their arm and their arm is in the way. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll have them lift their arm up and then they can just relax it on my shoulder while I'll come in and do some adjustments here to the side seam. And for them, it's relaxing to just kind of have that arm out and relax down on your shoulder. And also, I've noticed working with a client really close like this is they start to tend to not breathe. Like they'll sit there breathing really shallow and they start to kind of get dizzy and wobbly. So it's good to just kind of keep them talking and breathing deep. So ask them like, hey, are you planning any vacations? What's new in your life? And just keep them talking and moving. If you find that someone's sitting there still and they're holding their arm out and they're breathing shallow, eventually they might actually pass out or they'll get dizzy and they won't like the experience. So for those of you who are going through this video with me for the first time and you followed all the same measurements that I did, basically this fits perfect, everything's good to go, there's no fitting issues that we have to worry about. We'll go back to the tabletop and we'll put a blue line here on the quarter fold, the horizontal bounce line for the back. But other than that, everything is finished. Alright, so coming back here to the tabletop, go ahead and leave your side seams taped together. And untape your shoulders. So we have it blue right there. And again, if you were meeting with a client, you would want to clip the neck first before you started doing your fitting with your client. Okay, so let me talk to you just for a minute. For those of you who are doing this video now for the second time, and you were doing all custom measurements that were totally different from my measurements. When you were over on the dress form or working with your client and doing the fitting, you should have had some kind of like a red color pencil, maybe even a highlighter, maybe both. And as you start adjusting and moving seams and making new locations, I would do all of that in red. So then it really sticks out when you come back to the tabletop that everything in red was a new location that you need to fix. Same thing if you were just using some highlighter or something. Also, you might even put notes on the pattern piece itself saying the waist overall is too small, I need to add another ½ inch, blah, blah, blah. So just do all of your changes and fixes in red and some highlighter. What I want to do here is I want to show you the process that I went through to get ready for shooting this video. So now the dress form that I was using is a dress form that I've never used before. So the first thing I did was look at the dress form, put some tape on there, get everything squared up, take all the measurements. And then at one point, so I did a draft for the front and the back. And then I took those drafts, taped them together, clipped all the corners, went back to the dress form and did a fitting. And then while I was doing the fitting, I came in and I started finding out there's all these issues with the shoulders, the shoulder location, and the side seams. And this is not uncommon. It's not just because the dress form side seam was a little bit wobbly, it's just doing the process. And it's very similar to when you are writing a book or a screenplay or something. There's always going to be a rough draft and a rewrite and another rewrite before you get to your final. So anyways, basically I had a bunch of adjustments to do. I did those adjustments in red. I folded everything in red, taped everything back together, did another fitting to the dress form, and then I did a few more notes and stuff in pencil. I redid what my measurements were. And I noticed there was a lot of issues with the front. And so what I did is I ended up redrafting the front. So I took all of these new measurements off of here, turned those into my list of measurements, redrafted the front, and then again, the front fit pretty good. I just needed to tweak the shoulders a little bit more, and I was still having an issue getting the side seam straight up and down. And this is when I discovered that the back, when we're at that armhole plate, comes down 1 inch, out 1/2. And for my front, I needed to come down 1 inch and out 5/8, but keeping it at 0 here, and then everything was squared up and beautiful. So that was kind of like the last little thing that I finally figured out. From that stage, then I rewrote all of my measurements according to now what was fitting onto the dress form. And then I did one more draft with those measurements. Everything's super clean, exactly like what I was showing you during the demo. And then from that draft, I just traced off a new front and a new back so I can take these, cut everything, tape it together, do one more fitting. And I just wanted a proof to myself that everything here was perfect, and then I was ready to start shooting the video. So you would be at this stage now where you've gone through the draft, you've done a few redrafts, you've done a second fitting with your client or back to your dress form. Especially if this is new to you, you might end up doing this a 3rd time, a 4th time before you really get it nailed to where everything fits beautifully. So then eventually I got to the point where I knew my exact measurements that would fit. And then I did this draft here that you're looking at. This is what I did during the actual video. And even still, I got to a point where we were checking the balance of the armhole, and I still needed to do a little fix on the balance here. So even though I had all the exact measurements, just the fact that we're doing things with our hands and we're humans, you're still going to get a little bit of an uneven result, and you still need to come back in and balance things, tweak things, and have everything just right. Now, before we take this front and back and cut it out in muslin to get ready to do a test fit, you also want to draft the sleeve and make sure the sleeve matches perfectly back to your paper patterns and everything is balanced and fits great. Then at that point, we're going to cut and sew the sleeve and the front and the back all at the same time in muslin fabric. If you're doing this video for the first time and you're following along with me, we just did size 4. I'm going to do one video which is specifically just fitting perfectly back to this size 4, and that's intended if you're a beginner. There's another video where I do a sleeve draft for a size 6. But the whole time I'm doing the draft, I'm also talking about all of the different sizes that you can work with to fit back to your master pattern, as well as some problem solving for different issues that people will have doing custom work. And and I'll give you some tips and stuff as well for like plus size. So be sure to look for that there's 2 different sleeve videos depending on where you're going next with your project. And then at some point you will find there's also videos for cutting and sewing the front and back bodice as well as the sleeve. And then there's also the videos for doing the convertible collar and how to cut and sew that as well. Alright, so for those of you who are doing this as an assignment with me in class, go ahead and have all of your darts so they're pointing upwards. Keep your side seams taped together. Have everything clipped so I can see that you understood how to prepare this to get ready for doing a fitting. And go ahead and take a picture of this and submit this to me as part of your homework for completing this video.